Hello, everybody, and welcome to the GW International Scientist Practitioner Forum. I am Dr. Gladys Williams, and I, together with Dr. Richard Lightning, host these weekly meetings. Today, we're holding the 65th meeting, and thanks for being here and thanks for sharing your time with us. I'm sure you will find it worth it. The overall purpose of these weekly meetings is to enhance in the participants the ability to act as behavioral scientist practitioners. So to this endeavor, we present topics in behavior analysis that are applied, experimental, or theoretical in nature. And our guest speakers are prominent behavior analysts or prominent experts in behavior analysis in other fields, and that have made great contributions to the field. The forum is held in an informal manner. We want you to feel comfortable, to ask questions, and to be very collegial. The forum initially opened because of COVID, and we needed to maintain communicated. But we have been inspired. We mentioned it last week a little bit. We have been inspired by what happened at the turn of last century in a place called the Culture Cats. The 4 cats in Barcelona, where all the intellectuals will meet regularly at this place. And it was actually the place where Pablo Picasso made his first exhibition of his paintings in 1900 when he was very, very young. I prepared some pictures of the place because this is a place that if you go to Barcelona, you should visit it. Let me show you. So this is today how it looks like, and it's the same as it was then, more than 100 years ago. This is one of the logos that they have. This is the place. Barcelona is known for these beautiful buildings with these gorgeous terraces. It's not the best picture here, but it's good.
And Gladys, is it still a place where intellectuals go to meet and exchange ideas?
Yes, it is, but it's mostly now for like a regular restaurant, but people get together there just to keep the tradition. It was actually a place that in 1903 was closed because it didn't bring revenues to the restaurant, it was a place where they sell beer, brewery, they call it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This painting was made by, I think it was Picasso, and it says there, "We serve beer and can eat all day long." And the logo of the place was made by Picasso, and they use it still today. This is then, and this is today. They have kept it originally like it is. It's a very nice place, very colorful. It's big. This is an old picture. And I just wanted you to see it, and it's called the Culture Cats, and it's in the old part of town. So if you go to Barcelona, don't miss it. It's a nice place to go. So it's a place where the big intellectuals got together, and they were just having fun. We want us to be like this, have fun, learn from each other, reinforce each other, share our accomplishments with each other, and learn to disseminate what's happening in this group. So today we have we have Dr. Anthony Biglan and Andrew Banner returning. And last week we met with them, and we had a fascinating discussion about how we could improve society, how we can make it a better world. Dr. Biglan has written books about it, and we all should be familiar with his work because he has great things to tell us. So I want to thank you, both of you, for wanting to come back. And today, the topic of today really goes along with the objective of this forum, which is how we can become better practitioners. So thank you for doing it. I'm going to make you both of you host, or Tony, I'm going to make you host.
Actually, if you want to make me a host, I'll share my screen today.
Oh, you will. Okay. So Andrew, let me find it.
You're on mute, Tony.
I love the tour you just gave us, and I drink a toast to your concept, but it's 9 o'clock in the morning where I am. So,
Oh. So when you come to Spain, we will do it. Or if we have the conference in Boston, if it is live, and if you come, all of you are, I would love to have organized one evening in my home. I'm not far away from there. And we have a big space, and it would be fun to have it, have it there and to imitate the catch cats.
we're experiencing actually the worst surge that we've had with the pandemic. And I'm wondering if I'm ever going to travel again at the rate we're going. So.
Wow, yes, it's so sad what's happening. So sad.
So I think Andrew's going to take the lead on much of this, but let me just say that the nonprofit that we've created, Values to Action, which was prompted by my work on this book, Rebooting Capitalism. What we find ourselves doing in Values to Action is we have about 150 people who've joined. And well, there are a few people that are just, friends of mine and lawyers. Most of them are BCBAs. And it has been very interesting to understand their needs and their interests. And, I published The Nurture Effect in 2015. And so I've talked to about 30 behavior analytic organizations since then. And what I find is that there are an awful lot of people who feel like, Skinner told us that behavioral science would enable us to deal with just about every problem. And yet, I think many behavior analysts are frustrated with the fact that they're mostly working in a small number of areas. The three that come to mind immediately are, of course, autism and developmental disabilities and organizational behavior and management, but also treatment of drug abuse. And I think that's an area where we need more behavior analysts working in that area, because behavior analysts have developed very effective interventions, but they're not out there providing those. So it's one area of expansion, but there are many others. And so Values to Action has been creating action circles where we get small numbers of people to work together on very specific problems. And those include things like reducing disparities in reading skill, which is a huge risk factor for subsequent problematic development. I was just working on one this morning where we have an action circle that's trying to pull together everything we know about the reform of the juvenile justice system. And we intend to make that available in local communities to help people work on improving the juvenile justice system. And there are a bunch of more, but Andrew has taken the lead in turning this into a continuing education process so that we can help people expand their repertoire in ways that are consistent with the expectations for, the scope of practice and not going beyond your scope, what you're skilled in doing. But if we provide the skills, there's so many other ways that behavior analysts could make a difference. So that's kind of what we're working on. And on that note, I'll turn it over to Andrew.
All right. And so the format for today, last week, we went through a variety of slides and Tony sort of led a discussion. And this week, we kind of want to have it more of an open platform for a discussion. I will sort of start a conversation, and then hopefully we can sort of pass the microphone around the group and just sort of get input. So as Tony mentioned, we are a authorized continuing education provider for behavior analysts. And the rationale or the impetus for us becoming that ACE provider is to expand the repertoire of behavior analysts, because I think we know actually from our membership base that behavior analysts are just thirsty for broader application, especially in a world rife with social problems, where our world view is just so amenable to sort of identifying the variables that control those problems, and we can see a path forward. And so we're trying to equip behavior analysts with some broader skills in different areas relevant to these social problems. And so what I have in mind for today is to sort of describe a strand of continuing education that we hope to sort of develop and push out there for behavior analysts. And I'll give you a sense of what we kind of had in mind, but these strands have not been developed or fleshed out in very much detail. And so what we're hoping this conversation will do is to sort of give a little bit of body to these strands of continuing education. I'll take some notes, and we will use this conversation as a way to sort of develop these strands of continuing education. And as I start each conversation, I want you to imagine that each strand is a 4-part series. So a behavior analyst would pay for access to a series of 4 different CEUs, each one 50 minutes long, and it would guide them through a sort of a linear process that sort of starts with an idea, a social problem, and it finishes with some new skills, some explicit sort of instruction on how to do something different in their life. And so as this conversation unfolds, just sort of consider that we're trying to build a 4-part series for each of these strands. Of course, that's not set in stone. We can do more or less. But what might a 4-part series actually entail for each of these strands? Any questions about that so far? How my vision for today's meeting?
No, it's just very good.
Sounds all right. Okay. Yeah, cool. All right. So the first strand that we sort of started talking about last week, and that we're really excited about, is social media. If you haven't read the book by Andrew Morantz, who is a contributor for The New Yorker, he wrote a book in 2020 called Antisocial, and a very excellent read, really provocative, but it essentially details how the alt-right used social media so effectively in the 2016 election and in the years following that resulted in Donald Trump's election to the presidency. And what we need to do is find a way to harness social media in a way that effectively sort of fosters and promotes pro-social practices and values, because so much harm is being done on social media. That's not to say social media doesn't contribute good things into the world. You know, the example that always comes to mind is the Arab Spring in the early 2000s, right? Social media permitted people to show the world what was happening in the Middle East, and permitted a way for people to come together in a way that was effective in creating a movement to topple some of these dictators in the Middle East. But it is rife with problems these days. And so imagine now a 4-part series on social media. We talked a little bit last week about some of the behavioral underpinnings, right? I sort of invoked some Pavlovian processes, and Joe Lang sort of talked about some of the more operant processes. And then without even realizing it, I think Joe alluded to some of the ways in which people both inside echo chambers and outside echo chambers alter the value of outcomes produced in those echo chambers. That is to say, the way people arrange establishing operations both inside the group and outside the group, perhaps inadvertently. But imagine a 4-part series on social media. We're thinking we could talk about, you know, how and why social media came to promote antisocial norms and behavior, some of the strategies and tactics that social media conglomerates have used to sort of try to tame some of these antisocial practices, effective ways to persuade people to be more pro-social, and then ultimately maybe talking about different things people can actually do in their social media communities to promote pro-social values on these social media platforms. And so that's kind of the way that we've kind of approached talking about this. And so I want to sort of pose a question to you all, right? If as a behavior analyst or a behavioral oriented person, what type of content would equip you to behave more effectively with respect to social media? Or if you know any behavior analysts, what types of things would you like to learn about social media that might, I don't know, make you feel more comfortable about talking to people about these issues, about changing your own behavior with respect to these issues, and maybe even trying to influence local organizations that you either work for or that you have connections with to engage in more pro-social practices on social media? You're on mute, Tony.
I find it so difficult, such a difficult topic to approach, because I was thinking of all the bad things that are happening, and the Q thing, quanon, whatever, that's taking over, and there's no way that you could change their minds again to think differently.
I think from a behavioral perspective, we need to understand better how we can become influencers, and there are folks who are designated as influencers on social media. And I'm just barely familiar with the concept. I have no idea what it takes to qualify for that title. I have no idea the range of issues and topics in which people are influencing. I know there's influencers on style and fashion, but what we need to do is become influencers on behavior and caring for the commons, basically.
Pro-social.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Gladys.
I was thinking that it's like this responsibility will have to fall on the younger people. Younger, because I mean, about social media, I just I wish I could help, but younger people, that point that Richard brought is very good.
Yeah. So it's interesting you mentioned that, though. Some of the most popular people on social media are of the older generation. Barack Obama has the most followers, of more than anybody else on Twitter, right?
Oh, really?
Oh, Monica, what did you say?
It wasn't supposed to be open, but I was saying that, oh my God, he's Barack Obama. How can it not be followed by a lot of people? But it's not like a million people is going to follow me. No, I don't think so.
No, yeah, exactly. So actually, one of the things that Andrew Marantz talks about in that book is how things go viral. What constitutes a viral post and how to become an influencer. And he sort of talks about these really primal, he's not behaviorally oriented, right? He's talking about sort of primal instincts and emotions that get you to click on something, like like that is a response that will get someone to click on it, or like, like that's a response. If you can create that response in someone, they're going to click on that post, right? And so when Richard's talking about becoming influencers, and interestingly, the pro-social things, kindness, acts of kindness are not necessarily things that go viral, unfortunately. It's like disgusting, right, is a thing that will go viral, or I can't believe that, are things that will go viral. So like, it's you make a good point, Richard, about how can we create a pro-social world that of virality, that things will go viral because they are related to acts of goodness or something like that.
Well, and from an evolutionary standpoint, things are stacked in favor of threat. The decision researchers like to say that losses loom larger than gains. The first rule of any organism is to detect threat and avoid it, because those who didn't do it didn't survive. So we've evolved a tendency to be focused on that. Facebook did research, continues to do research, but one of the first things they realized is that threatening things that bother you are things you're more likely to respond to and attend to. And so their only interest was in getting as many eyes on Facebook as possible and keeping them there as long as possible. And they found that if they promoted posts that were distressing, that were angry, that people argued with, and so on, that got more eyes on Facebook. And so it's a challenge how you promote prosociality. And there needs to be more research on that, and there needs to be ways to stop some of the posts in social media that the disinformation, for example. But anyway, I don't want to do all the talking.
Yeah, I was thinking how to become influential. I have a teenage daughter who makes drawings, and he's trying to get a following. And sometimes she reaches 1,000 people, and her aim is to reach more. So she's, I think this is what Richard's talking about, no? Getting followers and getting to be known. And that person has to be really focused on that, and that's it. It's almost like, this is it. It's very hard to take her out of that.
Right.
And mode of thinking. It's a way of being. It's a way of the type of personality, I guess. How do we influence the young behaviorists to become young BCBAs to become influencers? It has to be something like they want to be.
Influencers, broadly speaking, as opposed to just popular in the field of behavior analysis, for example, I mean, Tony Biglan has like 2,000 followers on Facebook or something like that. Like, he's an influencer when it comes to the behavioral science community, but more broadly speaking, I think Tony would be the first to tell you that no one knows who he is.
Yeah.
and something else is that now younger people say that Facebook is not for young. The younger people do not use Facebook; they use Instagram and TikTok and those.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
But that's interesting.
Well, it would be possible to do research on this to see how you could get more, increase the volume of pro-social things. But I published an essay on this view of life, on medium.com. If you search my name in medium.com, you'll find things I've written there. But one of them was I called Like, Share, and Repeat. The first thing that progressives should do to deal with the problems of social media is stop arguing with or responding to things you don't like, because there's been an enormous amount of effort spent on pushing back against things you see that you don't like and you argue with and so on. That increases the likelihood that Facebook and the other social media will actually promote those things. So attention to something good, bad, or indifferent, it increases the degree to which those things are out there. And so what we need to do is find examples of pro-social values and norms and promote those and like those. So it's like, share, and repeat. And I think people don't realize how much of a difference they can make if they simply promote things that they like. So where are we with a 4-series course on this? Should we do it?
Yeah, I find it so important, this topic. I never thought about this, and I find it so relevant and so immediate. We need to do it like right away, because we're going in the wrong direction as people, as mankind.
Yeah.
And, I was just thinking, you should have a symposium or there at the conference, no? The next conference 2022 on this topic. Just to get people, younger people in.
Well, I think we lean more toward creating action circles on these things because, I mean, the tendency in academia and behavioral science has been, the next conference is coming up in about 6 months, and let's submit a paper there and so on. And, that has some influence. But what we're trying to do is create an action circle that gets very specific about what can be done on a problem that actually results in local action circles doing those things. And so, what we're trying to keep ourselves accountable in terms of the degree to which we've actually reached people who are taking action. And we haven't gotten very far on that. Just designing what could be done on this topic, for example, would take an action circle a couple of months to even come through with, here are things you could do in your local community. But once we got that, we can reach a lot of people and get groups of people working on this. So
that's a tricky thing about social media is it's not local. There's no local social media. It's global,
yes.
All these platforms are global. So like, let's say you bring a group of people together in a community, maybe they can promote some sort of movement in their local community. That is, they get a following for like this thing happening in their local community, for example. But then the trick would be to sort of try to like grow that in such a way that it becomes a more,
okay. So here's another possibility. We're working on juvenile reform, juvenile justice reform. That's one of the things we're trying to get. Okay, you could create an action circle that works on simply promoting the things that we know about how juvenile justice could be reformed, and that they wouldn't have to be local, but they could be gathering and increasing the network of people who are interested in that. And you could do that for any one of the other substantive areas that we're working on, including raising funds for values to action.
Right.
So back to the 4-part series, I think, a good starting point would just be to try to understand what has happened on social media and to drill down to sort of the behavioral underpinnings such that our audience can make sense of what's happening on social media, because there's a lot going on there in terms of the behavioral processes and sociological theories too. I think, it's like understanding how groups change and come together and grow and they become fluid and less structured or something like that. Like there's some good sociological theories that account or try to understand those processes, although there's some problems with sociological theories. But to start out, I think provides
research.
Pardon?
There is something there that says how these groups move, reinforce each other. There is such a thing?
Absolutely, there are such a thing. Yeah, so sociological theorizing does a pretty good job of accounting for how groups come together, how they sort of solidify around a few sets of, process values, if you will, and then how they change, how they grow, shrink, and move and change. And there's like 12 major sociological theories that kind of try to tap into these different things, each strengths and weaknesses. A lot of them rely on rational actor model, which is problematic because we know humans aren't rational. But there's some good stuff there. And in fact, exchange theory, which is a prominent sociological theory, is basically a Skinnerian perspective on group behavior, except they take credit for Skinner's work when you get down to it, which is kind of interesting. But there's some good stuff there. Structural theory and cultural theories are important in that body of research because they do not rely on rational actor model. The problem with sociological theories is they are just theories. There's no experimentation. There's no empirical verification that this theory is true, that it can be used to predict and influence what people are going to do. They are just stories about, the way groups come together and some of the important factors of group behavior, at least from my vantage point. But there's some good stuff there to understand it.
It's very hard to do research in that particular area.
It is.
From a contingency perspective, we're dealing with actions that rely on delayed, low probability, and typically contingencies that prevent versus contingencies that produce. And we're aware of some projects that have had success in organizing social groups that to deal with those contingencies. One is Scott Geller's program for actively caring for people. And the way that he's organized that is to establish a program at the elementary, middle school, high school, and college levels And he's actively integrated the mentorship across those different levels so that there's multi-generational support that's being developed and inculcated for the project. And they promote the programming that they do of recognizing and acknowledging other people's acts of kindness. And they give out their little wristbands and things like that for that. I was caught actively being kind to people. And I'm not sure what the current status of his outcome data is, if you guys are aware of it.
Richard, can you say the name again?
Scott Geller, Geller. And there's a similar project that's done in school systems. And it's not quite as well integrated, but what it does is it aligns fraternities, sororities, and the admittance department of universities with elementary schools. And elementary schools start to bring in all the paraphernalia from different universities, Stanford, Berkeley, and such, onto the campus. And they have their little banners and their logos and such. And the purpose of that program is to bring those remote contingencies to reality for the kids in elementary school, so that they actually have an affiliation with a university. They actually see the paraphernalia associated with that university. And it makes it much more real for them, rather than sitting in a classroom and saying, in 10 years, you'll want to apply to a university and go there. In this case, the university is actually there, and there's a direct connection with the representative university. That's very similar to what Scott Keller has been doing in his program. So I think that would also be an approach to look at on how we can build sustainable networks of multi-generational integration to promote certain types of programs that lead to a sustainable environment and a sustainable culture.
That actually segues really nicely into the next topic that we want to discuss today. So talking about the relationship between elementary schools and universities and sort of bringing some of those remote contingencies into early education classrooms. And let's say those kids go on to actually pursue higher education at those places or anywhere else. We see higher education as being sort of problematic in some ways because they very much facilitate the status quo. Some of the problems, and what can we do, right? So this next strand of continuing education that we're interested in is about reforming or intervening within higher education, which sounds really daunting, especially for someone who's at a big university, because they are just massive machines. And it doesn't really seem to matter how influential you are at a university, everyone's just sort of a cog in the wheel. And so what we're thinking in terms of higher education is articulating reforms needed to better contribute to human well-being, because so much of what is being taught, I think, is actually stifles well-being at the end of the day. And then elaborating specific reforms that should be adopted, or training programs that should be incorporated into effective education programs. So we're thinking maybe local study circles could influence individual universities at some level, but we don't necessarily know how exactly that might happen. And then sort of describe some of the behavior analytic applications of community organizing in higher education to sort of at least get people moving around in that area or thinking about how they might mobilize within a university. Now, if you look at almost every major university, there are student groups fighting for social rights, well, at least in every, well, I guess most universities are fairly progressive, I think, but, there is some toeholds already taking place at local universities, and even the bigger universities sometimes have more vocal student groups. And so if you're thinking about continuing education around the idea of reforming higher education, what type of things would you want to know about or learn about? And what kind of skills would you need to really work in this area?
Exactly. At the university level, my experience with it is that the administration of the university is totally separated from the rest of the academic body of the university, except for some very indirect contingencies of committees to deans to provosts, that kind of thing. You know, it's just one level of remote contingency after another, or not even remote, discontinuous contingencies is a better way, I think, of saying it. And none of those promote the kind of connection with community that I think is possible. I've not seen it. You know, when I was at UC Santa Barbara, it sits out on this little island, basically away from the community on a point. There's lip service given to community involvement, community programming, but there's nothing substantial, nothing sustainable that I've ever seen. And it can change. Although I'm not in that arena anymore, so I have very little contact with how that is organized and the contingencies that drive people's behavior there. But you can say that it's bureaucracy, will govern. That's another problem with the level of rule governance involved.
Other folks, Radhika, Corinne, Shubhra, if you have any ideas. Tony's holding up these popsicle sticks, and what that is it's a evidence-based kernel that promotes engagement throughout an entire group. And basically what happens is everyone in the meeting gets their name put on a stick, and to facilitate discussion within the group, we pull one out at random, and whoever name gets pulled out is asked to comment on the topic. And I can see Monica shaking her head right now. I'm not sure if she's pardon?
Corinne?
Threatening approach.
But the rule is
Pardon?
if you're called on and you want to pass, then that's just fine.
Yeah.
That's an assertive
You don't-
response. No.
Yeah, you don't actually have to talk about it.
I-
Monica, I'm interested to hear what Monica is laughing about over there.
Monica is in Spain. She's located in North Spain. Monica, any comments about the university in Spain?
The university in Spain, I think it's maybe kind of different, because we don't have the huge, we have huge universities, but in a little way. So I think the main problem in Spain is that the university and the professional field is not connected. And it's been a problem for maybe the last years. With all the innovations, we have difficulties in the interest of the university and the business is not the same. So the work that you can do is not adapted to what they want. And I think that's the main problem in Spain. The big companies. Oh.
Yeah, the system in Spain and in Europe and is very similar to the system in South America. So all of those is together, they differ from the American education at the university level. Whereas, all that's what's summarized by a sentence that Jesus Rosales said the other day. Jesus Rosales said, in Mexico, when he was at the university there, he learned to read books. That's what they taught him, to read books. When he came to the American university, he learned to write the books. So that's a big different way. In the United States, education at this level, I think it's much superior than in other parts of the world, the university level, where it's very practical.
It's not the component. I mean, it's not the component. It can be equal, but in America, they want the student to
in the United States
propose things and go ahead and take the role of directing the learning. And in Europe or in Spain, the teacher is the one that is directing, and you have to follow him. You cannot go away from what he says. So
very little autonomy.
Yeah,
for the student. There's no room to grow in, or not, to develop your own in Central America, South America, and Europe. But the United States is unique, the university education at those levels, where they really push you to be your own person, or almost to be your entrepreneur, almost like this, like they really push you. It's different. I know both systems very well.
Individualism.
That's what it is. I think so.
Right.
Yeah.
That's another issue, I think, that is not well understood in the populace in general, is the tragedy of the commons, and this issue that anytime you have an organized society, you have individual and community rights and resources that have to be balanced. And very few people actually understand that. They generally don't understand or even fathom the idea that, the things in common that we all use have to be a common value as well, and they're not.
Well, and in fact, over the last 50 years in the United States, we have moved toward a more individualistic, materialistic culture. In fact, there's a survey that's done of incoming freshmen in many universities that's been done for 40 years. And one of the things that happened in the 70s and early 80s was that the majority of kids coming in before then would say that they wanted to grow as a person, they wanted to give to their community, they were communitarian values, prosocial values. And that flipped, and the majority started to, somewhere in the 80s, the majority were saying they wanted to be rich, they wanted to be famous, materialistic values, and that has increased steadily. Robert Putnam's latest book, Upswing, describes the degree to which communitarian values and practices grew in the first half of the 20th century, and beginning in the late 60s, they began to decline, and we now have a society where, you can't even tell me to wear a mask because my freedom is more important than, anything else. We see Values to Action as an organization that's trying to create a movement to promote pro-social values, and we're certainly not the only people doing that. But it seems like that's foundational for all the other things that we need in a society, because as Richard suggests, in a society where everybody is in it for themselves, you're not necessarily going to get policies that benefit poorer people. The rates of poverty and inequality have soared in the last 50 years, thanks to the promotion of free market ideas that say, if I pursue my own economic well-being, then it'll necessarily benefit everyone. So it's a problem, and it's a problem in universities. And universities as institutions, I would argue, are generally not serving the interests of the vast majority of the population. The economists have certainly promoted free market economics, as have, conservative policymakers who've taken over policymaking. We need universities to start to look at the degree to which the population that they serve is doing well versus doing poorly. And that's not an important issue for many universities. We need to make that a central issue for community colleges and for universities. So that's one of the things we'd like to work on, but we haven't gotten an action circle on that yet. So
then I wonder if it would make sense to articulate first how decisions are made in these institutions as a way to at least understand the direction that you need to mobilize people. So, like, where do institutional policies come from and how do they get stamped into law, so to speak? And then to describe next how you might, go ahead, Richard.
No, I was just nodding my head in agreement.
Oh, well then, and then next, once you understand sort of how the decision process goes, then to sort of break down how you might persuade, how you can, and this is relevant to, I think, outside of institutions too, but it's how do you sell something to someone who has historically not wanted to buy it because it doesn't actually improve their bottom line or it doesn't actually fit with their worldview or something, right? Like, how can you make the fossil fuel industry more profitable while at the same time reducing their impact on the natural world? Because if you could put that together, right, then you could persuade the fossil fuel industry to clean up their act, pun intended. And so with higher education, how can you promote more pro-social values throughout the entire university, while also maintaining sort of high demand to attend that university or something like that?
And I would submit that the fundamental principle of behavior analysis is exactly what we need to understand that, and that's selection by consequences. If you want to understand the degree to which universities have moved toward the promotion of free market economics and so on, read Jane Mayer's book about how, starting in the 1970s, the conservative billionaires began to put significant amounts of money into programs in major universities that would focus on free market economics and analyses that supported that. And they essentially trained a cadre of people. In the Federalist Society was created by the Conservative Billionaire Coalition, and it's a network of influential lawyers, and they promoted the careers of these lawyers. They promoted the careers of journalists who were promoting this point of view. That was the result of university programs. Harvard University, and the conservatives realized they couldn't go into all these liberal universities and just try and take over, but they started to create programs and fund these programs. The book that who's the famous behavior analyst, Richard Herrnstein, the book that he wrote with one other person that said, that basically argued that Black people are intellectually inferior. That
the bell curve.
The bell curve, yes. And that book was supported by the Conservative Billionaire Coalition. And it was another example of efforts to bring people around to believing that the social policies that they were pushing were valuable policies. So it comes down to selection by consequences. If you want to change that, you've got to change the consequences for universities. The funding of federal government for research is one of the major determinants. Here at the University of Oregon, we have one of the wealthiest people in America, who is the founder of Nike, Phil Knight, and he's put $500 million into building a new physical science campus at the University of Oregon. University of Oregon is going to go way up in terms of its prestige with respect to physical science. Well, I submit that physical science is not going to solve our problems. How is that going to contribute to dealing with the major problems that our society has? They should be putting that money into behavioral science, but we don't have enough behavioral scientist billionaires yet. But it's selection by consequences.
Yeah. Well, unless anyone has a comment, that's a decent segue into our next slide. Does anybody want to comment on what Tony just said?
Not at the moment.
Very insightful.
And so next, what Tony is describing is some of the problems or some of the ways in which public health has become just abysmal in the United States and maybe in some other places around the world. I need to adopt a more international worldview for this conversation. I'm so used to thinking in my own bubble and I'm not even American, but and of thinking in my own bubble here in the United States. But the promotion of free market economics and the decline of public health, I think, are probably inversely related, such that as the billionaire coalition, conservative billionaire coalition, got more and more effective at advocating for policies, you could probably trace declines in public health at those same times, at least in the United States, which has some of the most unhealthy people on the planet, and yet the highest healthcare costs, arguably the best and the worst healthcare system in the world. And so what could we do, right, in order to get a behavior analyst to work in their community to improve public health? Behavior analysts do not feel comfortable, really going outside of their scope of practice. So what type of skills would they need, right, to start working on public health in their local community? I know this is what led me to Values to Action, is looking around and seeing the problems in the world through a behavior analytic lens, but not knowing exactly what to do in order to sort of work in those areas. And the more that I work with Values to Action, the more I realize that there are tried, tested, and true prevention research programs that are very behavior analytic when you break them down. Are not stamped behavior analytic. They weren't developed by behavior analysts per se.
Many of them were developed by behavior analysts. And some people who were drummed out of behavior analysis, like Jerry Patterson, but the fundamental principles that they used are behavior analytic.
There you go, right? So what we want to do is to draw those prevention research programs back into the field, to stamp them behavior analytic, appropriately stamp them behavior analytic, because as Tony points out, they are, and then give people a handle on how they can actually work in their community to disseminate these programs by identifying a particular problem they want to get on top of, and then giving them resources and really guidance in facilitating the dissemination of these prevention research programs. But yeah, go ahead.
As we've been working on continuing education, and Andrew is the leader in this, but I keep arguing with him. He keeps saying you can't give credits for things unless it's consistent with behavioral principles, right? And so public health is itself, I think, an issue that needs to be discussed, because I think one of the, if you read Science and Human Behavior, Skinner was talking about improving the well-being of all the people. Well, that's a population, and public health is simply the well-being of a population as opposed to an individual. And we have gotten very good at, creating contingencies that affect the well-being of individuals. But we need to look up from our work and look at the degree to which we're affecting the incidence and prevalence of problems in the population. And that's all public health is. And we absolutely have the tools to do that, but we do need to take that perspective of, wait a minute, we've gotten very good at getting kids to cooperate in schools, but what's the prevalence of cooperation in the society? We need to target incidence and prevalence. And as soon as you do that, I don't know if Andrew will agree. I don't know if the BCBA, the people who approve this will sue us over being non-behavior analytic when we talk about public health. We'll see.
They're not going to sue us, Tony. They're just not going to honor the continuing education units that we give out.
Well,
right?
We'll sue them. Right.
Right. In which case, now you get into it's not that they don't think public health is behavior analytic. If you talk about public health in the context of, I don't want to get into a theoretical discussion about what the BACB considers a behavior analytic, but the point is, I think we can do this in a way that is behavior analytic. But yeah, like if you wanted to reduce the incidence and prevalence of psychological problems in your community of children, right? What types of skills would you need to do that as a behavior analyst?
And children.
We haven't heard from Radhika.
Radhika. Just
Radhika.
Radhika?
Would that person care to speak?
Well, both Radhika and Shubra are nationals, and they're both parents of children with challenges. Very interested in the series, and they would have some unique perspective on how these things may play out in India. And that's also an area of discussion when we talk about sustainable cultures and cultures of care. We have two huge burgeoning populations in the East, or in Far East, both in India and China, and I'm not, that's another issue that definitely needs to be somehow managed, because I would say that that's probably 2/3 of the world's population, just those two countries.
Right.
And Andrew alluded to the issue of whether this is just United States centric, that what we're doing. And I find myself not inclined to apologize for that, because I think the United States is a cautionary tale for the rest of the world. And you can see how capitalism has taken over China, and and many of the things that the Chinese are doing that are highly problematic. The same principle are involved as they're involved in reforming capitalism in the United States, and the failure of the United States to deal with the problems it has is harming the rest of the world. So anyway.
I think what Shoni's also trying to say, if we can figure out a way to intervene upon some of the problems which are just glaring in the United States, then we'll have a model for, well, at least the underpinnings of a model to translate some of those changes to other countries. Although the context in which we're operating is very different than the context in which people in China or India or in the Middle East or even Canada, for an example, is operating, because even between Canada and the United States, there are subtle differences in culture, right?
There's a number of things that perhaps, as you did in your book, The Nurture Effect, Tony, a little bit more broadly, is to find all of those demonstration projects that actually have had an effect, either in a local community or more broadly within a region. I know that there was one example of that I know of from India, where a philanthropist put a computer in a neighborhood, and he had it behind a plexiglass screen, although, and it was just there and open and on all the time. And the kids in the neighborhood gravitated to it and started to use it and became computer literate very quickly. But they all had to share the one resource. It wasn't walls of computers made available with touch screens. One computer that did have a touch screen that was available to the kids, they were able to come on and figure it out and get online and start to access information that they never had access to before. So that's an example of a smaller scale project that might have some legs to it. Another project that has been publicized and has a very good research base on it was by Albert Bandura. And I talked a little bit about this some presentations ago with Nirvana and work that she's doing in the Far East or the Middle East. And Bandura's had a project where he went around the world in different cultures and actually was able to produce daytime soap opera serials.
Mhm.
And in these, one of them had to do with an elder Mexican living in near poverty or very meager means, who wanted to become literate, and the 2-year run of the series was about the biases he ran into, the challenges he had to overcome to finally get his certificate of literacy, and and the impact that that had on others in the culture. I'm not sure what the outcome data is for that. Now, there's also another series, again, daytime soap opera, of a girl living in a remote village and breaking away from the cultural norms and going to the city and establishing herself as a professional. And these were published and produced and had great success as daytime soap opera events, in public media. So those are other examples of how we can start to have influence. But again, that takes money, that takes resources. Some of it doesn't. There are less costly, and
that takes time addressing the film industry also.
Oh, yeah, it does, and you have to get support for that. But
yeah, they're usually.
The suggestion is, we have multiple layers of potential influence, and I think we have to somehow pull it together. And another technology that I know of, that I became aware of about 8 years ago by a TED Talk presentation on a child's first word. And it was a researcher at MIT, and he wired his house up and captured video and audio images of his son's development from 0 to 5, and was able to produce time worms showing movement within the house and the emergence of different types of vocal, verbal behavior competencies. And that was all very nice and interesting. But what was most chilling at the end is he said that the technology, and he spent the last half of the TED Talk going over that, is that the technology that was developed could actually trace the influence of social media events in the broader culture, and they could actually see sort of an umbrella effect of how a social media event in one outlet got picked up and amplified across other outlets, and how that person actually became a social influencer, and that the technology was there to actually measure that, to determine how broadly and how far out those ripples went, as it would go from one influencer to another one to another one. And they were able to actually demonstrate that and show it in 3D graphics. To me, that was both interesting and a little bit chilling, because I realized that the people who would most likely use that technology would not use it for the common good. And most likely it would be used for purposes of wealth and resource concentration, not for distribution and equitable use. But anyways, those technologies are there. And I think at this moment, a inventory of all of those technologies, all those programs, those things that can be done, including Scott Geller's program, Actively Caring, and looking at these and going, okay, now here we have a demonstration of plan in which we can implement. And now let's start implementing it here and cascade it out across generations, across cultural groups, across regions, so that those kind of things can be done very systematically and built upon a base of support that's sustainable and continuous.
And
broad-
that's exactly what our model of action circles is trying to do. So a local action circle in Louisiana right now is trying to mobilize a few people in a small community to implement some vetted prevention science research programs in schools, which are, they say, are just catastrophic in terms of the way that they're being operated. And from there, right, it's like proof of concept that you can actually do this on a local level, because that's another thing that I think is often overlooked. It's, you know, dreaming up these really systematic like ways of producing culture change or producing local community change is one thing, but getting people in those local communities to come together and move in the same direction at the same time is really challenging. It's a heavy burden for a few people to bear at the beginning when they decide they want to try to improve the well-being in their community. And then even then there's pushback from a variety of different sources that you don't anticipate from the outset, because well-being, as we said, as prosocial values, are not held by everyone. It's like, it's hard to imagine that not everyone thinks that like all kids should learn to read or read well, but it's true that some people don't care whether or not their child learns to read or not. And so there's some barriers to actually producing the change that we think is possible by way of local action circles.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to say something about the attitude towards scientific research, which doesn't help behavior analysts at all. And I'm thinking of conspiracy theories. You can give all the data in the world, you can give all the facts in the world to people who believe in conspiracies. And they are unbelievable. My own sister is into all of these terrible ideas that have been given on, she reads a lot of stuff too. But the fact that she doesn't believe in science doesn't help, and there is a movement against that now.
Joe Lang made some very good points about exactly that, this last presentation that Tony gave. And I think the insights that he gave during that presentation are well worth taking into consideration. And he also talked about exactly that issue, Corrine, about, you know, how we need to deal with these groups who are now becoming partitioned not only are they becoming partitioned, but they're becoming concretized. You know, they're becoming a self-sustaining unit of cultural participants in activity that is not open to outside influence whatsoever. And, you know, I think there's a lot that is possible through the research that's coming out of RFT that's looking at how, you know, relational networks become concretized, you know, and impervious to change. And that technology might allow us to actually figure out how to move forward with some of these types of situations. But
it's a change. So time really flies when we're having fun. Time is up. Andrew, could you please tell us what is the fourth part of your values to action?
Pardon me, tell you about what?
You said that there were 4 branches or 4 parts to the interventions you are suggesting. You gave us 3, right?
Yeah, well, you mean the 4 strands of continuing education that we're hoping?
Yes.
Yeah, the 4th one is related to a business, OBM. So creating businesses that nurture, or in other words, businesses who are concerned with making money, of course, but also about facilitating and improving well-being of the customers, right? The people who ultimately supply demand that support that business, the people working for them, and the community as a whole. It seems to us that businesses are concerned about their investors and to an extent their employees, but they are not very much often concerned about the welfare of customers who purchase their products, The tobacco industry, for example, is a prime example of that, or the larger community in which, you know, these businesses are operating, you know, and B Corps, you know, our organization, or as Richard suggested, we call them last week, N Corps, because they nurture, are important in that regard too. But yeah, that's the fourth strand.
Okay, great. Andrea, what you are working toward completing your dissertation, and you'll be a doctor soon, pretty soon, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Hopefully.
Could you give us is your dissertation on this topic?
Well, my dissertation is about the evaluation of behavioral interventions to reduce people's carbon footprints. So Tony and I came to University of Florida as an expert in the assessment and treatment of severe problem behavior, and I still work in that area with kids with developmental disabilities. But I have sort of would not have been very happy with myself if I was in a higher education situation with really smart people, and I didn't try to branch out during that time, because I knew if I didn't try to do it during this time, I probably wouldn't be supported in the way that I would need to be to do it. So I have sort of gone off into climate change and to greenhouse gas emissions, and Tony and I have sort of cooked up a vision for a multi-sector community intervention to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So you take an entire community, you draw a circle on a map around a community, and then you implement the global protocol to measure greenhouse gas emissions, which is the same protocol that the United States uses to measure their carbon footprint, that every country in the world uses to measure their carbon footprint, except now you do it just in a small community. And there's a fairly well thought out protocol for that. So once you have a measure of greenhouse gas emissions of the entire community, then you carve that community up into every sector that's operating in that community. So business sector, the retail sector, the faith-based sector, education sector, the household sector, the government sector. There's a whole bunch of variety of different sectors. And you identify the contributions of each sector to the carbon footprint of the entire community. And then you mobilize each sector in such a way that you bring them together around this idea of reducing their carbon footprint, and you develop strategies for each sector. Now, that is not my dissertation. That is a huge undertaking that will require thousands of dollars in funding, right? Which we're applying for right now. My dissertation is the development of strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector on a smaller scale, right? So the underpinnings to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from entire sector come from behavior analytic research or behavioral science research that identifies strategies on smaller scales. That's sort of like the starting point. And so that's sort of more related to what my dissertation is about. But in service of this vision of a large-scale multi-sector community intervention, and that's one of our action circles through Values to Action right now, is developing that proposal to actually do that in a local community.
Very good. Well, you certainly, Tony and Andrew, you have targeted important issues that are so relevant today, and we need to continue discussing them and learn more about them. So I would love to invite you again to come back.
Well, maybe once we move a little further down the road, you know, when we actually start moving people towards more pro-social values, and we have some compelling information to share, we'll be happy to come back. We're moving in the right direction, but
yes, we would love to help and to see how we could participate in Values to Action, and if people want to join. And
well, yeah, that's actually the last slide, which we actually never got to last week because the discussion was so fruitful. But this is things you can do. So you can join Values to Action, or if you think the value of the organization, the mission of the organization is valuable, you can donate on a monthly basis, a one-time donation as small or large as you feel fit. You can read Rebooting Capitalism, because that is basically the impetus for Tony starting Values to Action. He wrote a book, and the Values to Action is to put the book into real world sort of practice. And as I mentioned, you can donate to Values to Action to support the mission. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much for that valuable work that you are doing. Thank you so
Yeah.
much
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, we appreciate it.
for participating. And hopefully we'll see you back. Francis McNair is going to talk with Peter Killeen and hopefully Jack Marr. I would love for you to be present at that talk in about a month.
Great. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. We
I will
appreciate it.
Yes, I will continue inviting you. Anyways, okay.
Bye-bye.
So you all have a good weekend and thank you for participating in today's forum. It has been valuable. Bye-bye, everybody.